Good afternoon, and welcome to the third and final day of the FHFA Wrap-Up Public Listening Session on Federal Home Loan Bank System at 100, focusing on the future. My name is Karen Burke, and I'm Associate Director of Examinations in the Division of Bank Regulation. Thank you all for being here with us today and taking part of this listening session. Before we move forward with our agenda, I have a few important housekeeping items. We have organized this listening session to obtain input on issues relating to the federal home loan banks. During today's session, FHFA will not discuss the status or timing of any potential rulemaking. If FHFA does decide to engage in a rulemaking on any matters discussed today, this listening session would not take place of a public comment process. The rulemaking document would establish the public comment process, and you would need to submit your comments, if any, in accordance with the submission instructions in that document. FHFA may summarize the feedback gathered at today's session in a future rulemaking document, if we determine that a summary would be useful to explain the basis of a rulemaking. Anything said in this session, and all that also includes reactions, nodding, eye rolling, should not be construed as binding on or a final decision by the director of FHFA or FHFA staff. Today's session will be live streamed on FHFA's website and video recorded. FHFA may also prepare a transcript of today's session, which would include the names of all speakers and the organizations they represent, if any. The recording and any transcripts prepared will be posted on FHFA's website and YouTube channel, along with any materials being presented today or otherwise submitted in conjunction with the listening session. Each speaker today will have 8 minutes to speak. We will ask that you turn on your video when it's time to deliver your remarks. I will remind you at the 7-minute mark that you have 1 minute remaining. If you go over, I will unfortunately have to interrupt you. I hope I do not have to do that, but I want to be mindful of everybody's time this afternoon. Our first speaker is Clifford Rossi from the University of Maryland, who will be followed by Leslie Gooch of the manufactured housing industry.
All right, so do we have the slides up and available? All right, thanks. So for 90 years, federal home loan banks have served the nation's housing finance system by providing liquidity to mortgage markets. Over that time, that mission has evolved as the structure and composition of market participants has changed. And that mission has strayed from its core, and the housing finance system at its inception was vastly different from today's. However, the job of reimagining the housing finance system of the 21st century remains unfinished. In its current state, the U.S. housing finance system is dominated by a pair of government-sponsored enterprises, and despite both entities remaining in conservatorship since 2008, pose a systemic risk over the long run. The problem, in short, is there's simply no competition for Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, the only GSEs that can serve as mortgage credit guarantors and securitizers. But is there a solution to this? I actually believe that there is. If the federal home loan bank system is reinvented, if the federal home loan banks were granted the power to act as guarantors and securitizers, systemic risk would be reduced, competition would increase, and the housing systems market would become more stable. The FHFA has the ability and the authority to not just reimagine the federal home loan bank system, but to reshape the conventional secondary mortgage market. Next slide, please. The roadmap to accomplishing this is as follows. Over the long term, the goal would be to consolidate and transition federal home loan banks to a guarantor and securitization form of operation. Doing so would reorient and reinvigorate the federal home loan bank mission that has strayed from its original focus. It would also amplify the impact the federal home loan banks would have on housing finance and community lending, moving them from a minor player to a more prominent role. It would also have ancillary benefits on reducing systemic risk to the housing finance system by increasing competition in the secondary market and diversifying credit risk more generally. In the intermediate term, the path to attaining that objective would follow what I refer to as the 3 R's. First, restructure, that is focused on charters and consolidate the federal home loan banks and allow current GSEs a path to exit conservatorship. Recapitalize, that is focus on financing and capital plans. And finally, revitalize, focus on operations and systems, risk management and controls that would be needed in the new structure. Finally, in the short term, we need to ensure that the Federal Home Loan Bank's mission does not stray any further by prohibiting non-bank financial institutions from becoming members of the Federal Home Loan Banks and restricting advances to direct mortgage lending with an emphasis on affordable housing. Next slide, please. So why reform? Over time, the small lender, community-based, and affordable housing focus of the Federal Home Loan Banks has morphed into something else. Indeed, today, direct allocation of advances to support mortgage lending has shrunk, thanks in part to a disproportionate share of Federal Home Loan Bank advances now going to the larger depository. Moreover, Federal Home Loan Bank advances have been used to shore up liquidity for troubled institutions that are not mortgage-centric banks. For example, Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, and even Silvergate have all received sizable Federal Home Loan Bank advances. Using advances to effectively shore up liquidity for non-mortgage related activities is not the intended mission of the Federal Home Loan Bank. Further, the direct role of the Federal Home Loan Bank in supporting housing finance is overshadowed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, exacerbated in part by the dominance of non-bank financial institutions in the origination and servicing business since 2008. So to increase their market presence over the years, the banks, the Federal Home Loan Banks, have had to think of ways to expand their membership base. An expansion of members to include non-banks would seem like a logical move for the Federal Home Loan Banks. However, that would immediately expose them to significant risk, since unlike traditional banks, non-bank mortgage lenders are not regulated at the federal level for safety and soundness. The Federal Home Loan Banks also attempted to boost their market relevance with the 1997 rollout of the Mortgage Partnership Finance Program, or MPF. The MPF enabled Federal Home Loan Banks to enter into risk-sharing arrangements with lenders directly, and the hope was that this would aid them in their efforts to compete against Fannie and Freddie on credit risk. However, given the continuing dominance by both GSEs, it's clear that the MPF has never realized its full potential. So what would the future of the U.S. housing finance system look like with the Federal Home Loan Banks and the FHFA now in search of a long-term viable mission for these entities? Next slide, please. So GSE reform has been batted around for years, with no movement from Congress that pragmatically would be required to achieve a comprehensive restructuring and post-conservatorship outcome. As a result, the duopolistic, economically inefficient model for the mortgage secondary market continues today. Moreover, the issue of systemic risk to U.S. taxpayers from exposure to two exceptionally large credit guarantors has not been addressed. Various proposals for a more competitive mortgage secondary market surfaced several years ago, including one from the MBA, Mortgage Bankers Association, that recommended a multiple guarantor approach. While the MBA did not directly specify what firms could be good candidates as mortgage credit guarantors competing with Fannie and Freddie, Federal Home Loan Banks would be well positioned with some restructuring for such a role. And this isn't as far-fetched an idea as it sounds at first glance. As some might recall, the FHFA in 2008 was actually directed by Congress to consider the possibility of allowing Federal Home Loan Banks to securitize mortgage loans. Having 4 or 5 guarantors in the mix would reduce systemic risk to the housing finance system by diversifying across more guarantors and enhancing competition. It would, moreover, amplify the ability of Federal Home Loan Banks to promote community-oriented mortgage lending and affordable housing opportunities. Federal Home Loan Banks are mortgage specialists with deep experience managing these risks in all types of markets. Their ability to launch and proliferate the MPF program underscores their expertise at pricing and structuring viable credit risk sharing arrangements. What's more, thanks to the implementation of the common securitization platform for Fannie and Freddie, Federal Home Loan Banks now have a clear path to enter into direct securitization with fewer operational hurdles. The next slide, please. The roadmap to transition Federal Home Loan Banks to a true guarantor securitizer role would need to take on a three-pronged approach, as I said earlier: restructure, recapitalize, revitalize. Restructuring would entail consolidating the 11 Federal Home Loan Banks into 2 or 3 larger entities to achieve scale, provide a path for Freddie and Fannie to exit conservatorship. Challenges, of course, would include addressing charter issues and establishing a full explicit guarantee for both Fannie and Freddie and the new guarantor. Recapitalizing the Federal Home Loan Bank would be a component of the process, along with issues relating to the joint and several liability debt issuance activities. Finally, revitalization would include upgrading operational and systems capabilities and improving risk management processes and controls. That final step is actually very vital for an effective transition. The next slide. So in summary, Federal Home Loan Banks have provided liquidity to the U.S. mortgage market for roughly 90 years. But their mission has waxed and waned over time, and we're now at a point where their
1 minute
impact
remaining.
and community-based lending has diminished. The current fragmented U.S. housing finance system would never have been designed as it stands today. Long-term restructuring of the Federal Home Loan Bank system, while certainly not an easy path forward, provides the best solution that we have for reducing systemic risk and promoting a more competitive and vibrant mortgage secondary market. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Leslie Gooch from the manufactured housing industry, who will be followed by Cornelius Hurley from Boston University.
Thank you very much. My name is Leslie Gooch. I am the CEO of the Manufactured Housing Institute. MHI's members include home builders, suppliers, retail sellers, lenders, installers, community owners, community operators, and others who serve the industry. We also have 48 affiliated state organizations. In 2022, the manufactured housing industry produced almost 113,000 homes, and this accounted for approximately 11% of new single-family home starts. MHI's members are responsible for close to 85% of all of the manufactured homes that are produced every year. Manufactured housing offers value to consumers because of the technological advancements and cost savings that are associated with the factory-built process, and because of the efficiencies that come with our federal building code, which is known as the HUD code. So as a part of the discussion today, what we'd like to emphasize is that we believe that the U.S. housing finance system must do more to support homeownership through manufactured housing. So what does that look like for the Federal Home Loan Bank system? MHI has some suggestions in this regard. The greatest liquidity need that we have is with respect to personal property manufactured home loans. Currently, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have not purchased personal property loans, and that they haven't done that in over 15 years. Last year, FHA insured only a couple of personal property loans under their Title I program. For years and years under duty to serve, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have looked at resuming the purchase of personal property loans, but so far they have not done so. So the federal home loan banks should be taking a serious look at what role they can have using the traditional model that it uses to make advances to banks secured by collateral, in this case, personal property loans. Obviously, standards would be needed regarding the solvency, lender solvency, appropriate collateral levels and such, but we just think it's very, very important to support homeownership through manufactured housing, and we think that there's a role that the federal home loan banks should have here. When it comes to real property loans, we also believe that there's a need for the federal home loan bank system to be more supportive. Right now, Fannie and Freddie do have support for real property manufactured home loans, but it's not at the volume that we think that it should be. And what is really needed is a liquidity facility for lenders that retain the servicing, along with advanced responsibilities that go along with that. The purpose of a servicing liquidity facility would be to create more confidence and liquidity in our sector. Advances could be structured in a safe and sound manner, working in conjunction with warehouse lenders with adequate collateral related to the underlying mortgage servicing rights, or MSRs. We would also suggest that federal home loan bank profits should be allocated to affordable housing, that more should be allocated to affordable housing. And we also believe that that affordable housing activity should include manufactured housing. So these are some of the suggestions that we have. We appreciate the opportunity to share those suggestions during today's listening session. And MHI and our lender members stand ready to work with the FHFA and the federal home loan banks to explore and implement these kinds of options to make sure that manufactured housing is supported through the banking system, because we are such a critical part of affordable homeownership in America. Thank you very much, and this concludes my remarks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Cornelius Hurley from Boston University, who will be followed by Dutch Harsman from New West Community Capital.
Thank you, Karen, and good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you are. I congratulate Director Thompson and her team of devoted professionals for their ongoing efforts to raise awareness about the Federal Home Loan Bank system. Dozens of roundtables around the country involving hundreds of participants have gone a long way to exposing this once dark but now growing and concerning corner of the financial services industry. Yet there is still so much more that is little known, and it is misunderstood in many circles. And I regret that much of this confusion is by design. For example, the federal home loan banks themselves claim that they receive no taxpayer support. Yet 100%, they are 100% supported by the taxpayers. Their debt would be worthless without the implied guarantee of the taxpayers. They claim not to be subsidized, and yet they receive an annual taxpayer subsidy of over $9 billion. Now, much is made of the highly promoted and admirable affordable housing program, but few realize that that program is less than 4% of the subsidy that the federal home loan banks receive. What that means is that there is a negative annual rate of return to the taxpayer of 96%. That's 96% negative return to the taxpayers. For some perspective on the proportionality here, just one loan by one home loan bank to one borrower, Silicon Valley Bank, was 40 times, that's 40 times the entire 2022 assessment for all home loan banks for affordable housing. Put another way, the AHP contributions make up less than 0.5% of the total assets of the home loan bank system. They can do so much more, as was pointed out earlier. And in a time of housing and climate crisis, they must do much more. If this review process, the FHLBanks at 100, achieves nothing else, training the eyes of the public on this admirable but grossly underfunded program will be a success. Whether it's through legislation, through regulation, let the federal home loan banks themselves explain to the taxpayers why sharing 50% of their net income in this public-private partnership is not in order. Now, the home loan banks claim to have an unblemished lending record. Yet their history, as was pointed out earlier, will be forever associated with the likes of Silvergate, Silicon Valley, Signature Bank, IndyMac, Countrywide, and Washington Mutual. Yes, due to sloppy underwriting, they have made many bad loans. But for those, they get a pass. Why? Because the FDIC has consistently borne the cost of the FHLBank's mistakes, to the tune of $11 billion between 2006 and 2022. And we know that it is the full faith and credit of the taxpayers that lends credibility to the FDIC fund now more than ever. Now, the federal home loan banks would have us believe also that their mission is solely about providing liquidity to the banking system. They hope that taxpayers will be satisfied with their token contributions to affordable housing. At a time of housing crisis, empty gestures are no longer sustainable, especially from a government-sponsored enterprise such as the federal home loan banks. So what to do? Here are 4 actionable recommendations that I make. They are mission, transparency, accountability, and community support. First, with regard to mission, let's reject the notion that the home loan banks are intended to be the country's lender of last resort. Just in the last 10 days, the federal home loan banks have issued well over $300 billion in taxpayer-supported debt. For housing? For community development? No. They did that to serve as a conduit for the customers of our country's regional and community banks as they flee to the embrace of the too big to fail banks. Let's face it, the too big to fail banks already enjoy their own implied taxpayer guarantee of all of their liabilities. They don't need to. When the current banking crisis recedes, as it eventually will, and local financial institutions are laid bare, perhaps then the FHL banks can play an important role in filling the void. For now, let's reaffirm the mission of housing and community development. Next, had we known about the FHL bank's massive loans to the likes of Silvergate, Silicon, and Signature many months ago, when those loans were first made, and they were made 6, 8, 9 months ago, market discipline in the marketplace may have replaced the chaos that we are experiencing now. To this day, we do not know which banks are borrowing our taxpayer dollars from the home loan banks. Nothing instills panic more than ignorance. So my recommendation number 2 is simply transparency. Disclose who is borrowing from the home loan banks. Next, FHL banks point to collateral as their backstop. In fact, the FDIC, not collateral, is their backstop. It is the FHL bank's super lien against the FDIC in the event of a bank failure that causes the moral hazard. That super lien perverts the underwriting process of all home loan banks. So recommendation number 3 is accountability. When the FDIC experiences a loss, as it is going to do in the case of Silicon and Signature, that loss ought to be conveyed back into the Affordable Housing Fund and distributed among all home loan banks. And recommendation number 4 has to do with the fact that many banks and just about all insurance companies are not in the home loan mortgage business. If they are not, they ought to submit a definite plan indicating how they intend to support those markets. In the coming weeks, you'll be considering many things, many other issues as you develop recommendations for Congress and for the public. Issues such as governance, consolidation, membership, executive compensation. I hope that in your deliberations, you will look beyond what the FHL banks have evolved into and reimagine the public purposes they were created to serve and can serve in these difficult times. Thank you for your time and attention, and good luck with the rest of your deliberations.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Dutch Harsma from New West Community Capital, who will be followed by Lee Lester, Ubuntu Institute of Learning. Thank you.
Well, good morning. I can't seem to start my video because it tells me the host has stopped it. So if the host can start my video, I'd appreciate it.
Dutch, can you please try now? Thank you.
There we go. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Dutch Harsma. I'm the president of New West Community Capital. We're a nonprofit community development financial institution. We have offices in Boise and Phoenix, and we work throughout the Intermountain West, providing lending for affordable housing and nonprofit community facilities. I'd like to thank the Federal Home Loan Banking System for their support of affordable housing over the years. We too share a passion for affordable housing in communities, and we are a member of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Des Moines as well. So being both a practitioner and a member of the bank, we have unique insights into the inner workings of the Federal Home Loan Banking System as it relates to affordable housing production in the Intermountain West. At this time, when we are facing a liquidity crisis in the United States, institutions like the Federal Home Loan Bank are critical to supply liquidity That's the initial intent of the institution, and one that has functioned fairly well. I think if we look at any of the Federal Home Loan Bank's advanced systems here over the last month or so, we'll see that they are providing critical liquidity to the marketplace. Without liquidity, there is insolvency among financial institutions. So it's a critical component. And I think our work is at the margins of improving the federal home loan banking system. Let's acknowledge that it works very, very well and is one of the keystone institutions to provide liquidity to the system at a time when it's needed more than ever. I'd say as a practitioner, one of the few things that we'd like to address are the manners in which community development financial institutions can take advances from the Federal Home Loan Bank. We do have to pledge collateral like every other financial institution. Those collaterals is discounted. We typically provide affordable housing mortgages on permanent multifamily properties as collateral. We'd like to see an advance rate that is much more in line with the work that we're doing in the marketplace. The more advanced that we have, the more liquidity we have, and the more we can place that liquidity down into the cracks, into communities to help them build affordable housing in places that oftentimes don't have the kinds of capital support needed to do these kinds of projects. Second item is pricing. We've seen some pretty dramatic increases in interest rates over the last 6 months or so. I think we can begin to use some of the tools available on pricing. That would certainly help keep many of these projects feasible. We are facing a time where between inflation, a supply chain challenge, and higher interest rates, many projects are becoming infeasible over time. I think if there are ways that the federal home loan banking system can use their balance sheet and systems and tools to even out some of these swings in interest rate shocks. Many things in community development simply don't do well with interest rate shock. And helping cushion some of those or smooth out some of the rises and the dips certainly would help. I think that would be something worth exploring over the long term. I also want to touch on the AHP program, or the Affordable Housing Program. As was mentioned, it is one of the largest affordable housing privately funded sources of capital in the country, second only to the federal government. It works very well in affordable housing. Most projects, especially in areas that don't have a lot of local public investment in affordable housing, use the AHP program as a critical source of capital to make those projects feasible. It works very well. We as a sponsor bank sponsor member would also use this program to help many of our developers work in the space. What I will say is it tends to be overly complex, both on the approval process to use the AHP and on the compliance for both developers that use the program and member banks that must, over the long term, monitor these projects. I think there are several proxies that we can utilize for compliance that will make it both easier for developers and member banks to do so. But it is a critical support. I'd encourage more rather than less. And I think our work around the federal home loan banking system as both a practitioner and member are at the margins. The system works very well to meet liquidity needs. I think we simply need to expand the ability to do that in communities in most in need. And with that, I'll conclude. Thanks so much for your listening and appreciate your work on this issue. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lee Lester from the Ubuntu Institute of Learning, who will be followed by Amanda Novak of YMCA of the North.
Hi, my name is Lee Lester. I'm the Executive Director of Ubuntu Institute of Learning, and we are a training organization supporting underinvested communities by providing training, consulting services, and technical assistance necessary for their long-term financial sustainability. We focus in the areas of affordable housing and entrepreneurship. And so my speaking here today is focusing on specifically partnering with local nonprofit housing organizations. One, to increase outreach and education by partnering with those local agencies. Also, to establish a fund, I recommend we establish a fund for CDFIs partnering with nonprofit housing organizations to be able to buy homes with cash. I live in California, and in the high cost markets, we're seeing a lot of investors pick up homes in lower income communities because they're able to pay cash. So having access, I think that would be great. Another program that we recommend is to fund an IDA program on a national level. We know it used to be funded by AFI, but that funding ended in 2017. So to establish a fund that would fund an IDA program that could be used in partnership with the WISH program would be very appreciated and necessary for our low income communities. Also, that IDA program could also be used for business creation, and local nonprofits who provide culturally curated entrepreneurship education could partner with the Federal Home Loan Bank to provide this. One thing that the previous IDA program had was a lot of education requirements, and I do recommend keeping that as going forward. Another idea that we're hearing locally is create a program that would fund land banks in each state that nonprofit housing organizations can access directly, and in order to help create more affordable, long-term affordable home ownership. And then lastly, increase opportunities for local agencies to have input in creating these programs for their communities. Something similar to what we're doing today. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for those of us who work locally, but also nationally, to be able to kind of provide that voice of what it is we actually need in our local communities. So I'm very appreciative for having this opportunity. Thank you again, and I'm done.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Amanda Novak from YMCA of the North, who will be followed by Diane Zheng from University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Thank you, Director Burke. Hello, my name is Amanda Novak, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategic Planning for the YMCA of the North, headquartered in the Twin Cities, and the leader in well-being experiences across the state of Minnesota. I'm deeply committed to building and strengthening community in both my personal and professional life. I've served on the Federal Home Loan Bank of Des Moines Affordable Housing Advisory Committee for the past 7 years and have seen the positive impact the AHP, down payment, and other affordable housing products have had on the health of the communities our Federal Home Loan Bank serves. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts on the future of the Federal Home Loan Bank system. I will start with the caution that a robust analysis should inform any consideration of potential changes to the Federal Home Loan Bank's membership, products, and services. All policies should be reviewed thoroughly as to not shrink the system's ability to serve its members and to continue to generate earnings for the AHP program. Federal Home Loan Bank members are key partners for housing and community development. They not only fund the AHP program, members have a direct connection to their community's needs and are responsive to them. Members know that the health of the community is directly tied to the health of their institution. And we all know that communities have a broad range of needs related to investment types and supports. So with that, this is why it's important for there to be a broad range of member sizes supporting those needs. As you have likely already heard from many others, AHP is complex and needs to be simplified. Although we appreciate the efforts to streamline that have been made to date, more needs to be undertaken. Per statute, AHP gives preference to nonprofit organizations, which are community-based organizations. This preference should continue, and future changes should address the costs that nonprofits have to bear due to AHP's inherent complexity. One way to do this would be to allow AHP to rely on both federal and states funders' review and monitoring requirements. This shift would directly align with the AHP statute that calls for regulations to coordinate with other federal funders to the maximum extent possible. AHP statute also allows for the preponderance of assistance to be received by low and moderate income families. With this in mind, let AHP be more flexible and take risks rather than expecting and administering to 100% compliance 100% of the time, which is neither realistic nor responsive to the community. I would also ask the community to curtail overreach. Allowing supportive services on the operating pro forma is necessary. AHP is paying for the project to be built or rehabbed, not for the provision of supportive services. Let AHP be the source of housing it needs to be, flexible, patient, adaptable during our retention period. Let AHP be a grant with success measured by a straightforward outcome, the acquisition, construction, or rehab of affordable rental or owner-occupied housing. The final comments I would like to make are with regard to the Federal Home Loan Bank's ability to offer a volunteer program, which is a contribution made by a bank in addition to and outside the AHP. I am proud that the Federal Home Loan Bank of Des Moines recently announced a $10 million match to members' grants for capacity building and working capital, the scarcest and most critical of financing needs of many of our community partners. This flexible, streamlined, and responsive program could not be possible within the confines of AHP. Allow these voluntary programs to always remain streamlined. Don't layer requests for documentation or data. Let them stay innovative, responsive, and impactful. Thank you, Director Burke, for the opportunity to share my perspective.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Diane Chang from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who will be followed by Marcia Erickson from Grove, South Dakota.
All right, thank you, everyone. It is a great honor for me to speak here at this Federal Home Bank listening session. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Finance, University of Wisconsin-Madison. Why I'm here today, since I spent almost 8 years studying this financial institution, Federal Home Loan Bank, and got my PhD degree from University of California, Berkeley, by putting this study into my dissertation. So I'm very happy to share some of my careful thoughts with the public from a researcher's perspective. So first, I want to emphasize that my current study is only on the advanced business of the Federal Home Loan Bank. In 2022, the Federal Home Bank provides $819 billion advance to the mortgage lenders, which makes the Federal Home Bank the dominant wholesale funding provider in the mortgage market. And the Federal Home Bank is a very special lender in two senses. One is that because of the GSE status, the Federal Home Bank was able to fund their lending with a very low cost, close to the treasury yield, and they pass that cheap rate to their member banks. And second, different from many other private wholesale funding providers, the Federal Home Bank charges the same interest rate for all its member banks, regardless of their size. So for many small banks, this is the only source of wholesale funding at such a low cost. The first conclusion from my study is that the advances provided by the Federal Home Loan Banks substantially help the mortgage lending of their member banks. How did I get that conclusion? I did a very careful research design using bank mergers. You might think this is not a very hard work to do. You can simply compare member banks with non-member banks. But there's problems with that comparison, and we cannot get a very meaningful conclusion from that comparison, because member banks, if a bank wants to make more mortgage loans, they tend to join the Federal Home Loan Banks. So I solved this problem using a research design using bank mergers. So if the background is that if a non-member bank was acquired by a Federal Home Bank member bank, the target branches will have access to Federal Home Bank funding after the merger. But only that is not enough, because two things might happen at the merger. One is the funding access change, and the other is the merger itself, which might affect the lending performance of the target banks. So to solve this problem, I consider multiple target mergers where a bank simultaneously acquire multiple target banks, and some of them used to be members, some of them used not to be. And with within the merger, I compared this non-bank and non-member and the member target to get the difference of to get the Federal Home Bank treatment impact. So this is an example of a multiple target merger in my study. So on this map, the blue dots are Illinois National Banks, which was operating in the urban areas of Springfield. So in the year of 2003, it acquired two banks, Triangle and Cross. And the Triangle Bank was a member before, and Cross Bank was not a member. Both of them were acquired. So I'm comparing within this merger, I'm comparing Cross Bank and Triangle Bank to difference out the merger effect. So what is remaining is just the impact on from the Federal Home Bank advances. Okay. So this is a highlight graph from the study. So the first, we can see banks reduce their mortgage rate after getting access to Federal Home Bank. So you can see that if the impact persists for many years, and the overall reduction of the mortgage rate is about 18 basis points. In terms of the volume, there is even more substantial change of the volume increase. You can see after getting access to Federal Home Bank funding, and the bank will issue more mortgages by about 16%. So that is the first conclusion of this paper. And the second conclusion is that the Federal Home Banks matters more for small banks. Here I show you the share of mortgage funding from Federal Home Bank. I grouped the banks into three categories according to their size. The first group is the Big Four national bank, which is the dashed line here. And the middle is regional banks with total assets above $1 billion, but not Big Four. And the total assets below $1 billion is the community banks, which is smallest group, which is here. And on this graph, I plot the share of their Federal Home Bank advances in their mortgage lending. I plot it over time. So we can see very striking two patterns. One is that the level is very high for small banks. A typical community bank, 40 to 50% of their mortgage origination is funded by Federal Home Bank advances. Second, we can also see the Federal Home Bank advances matter more for smaller regional and community banks. So Federal Home Banks have reshaped the landscape of bank lending by reallocating more resources to smaller banks. And then we can study, my study goes further to study why small banks matter. There are a variety of reasons why small banks could benefit to the consumers, but mainly I focus on two. First, Federal Home Bank funding, by helping small banks, they shift the market structure and makes it more competitive. The market competition index will drop in the bank that was merged into a bigger bank and having access to Federal Home Bank advances. As a result, the competing banks also reduce their mortgage rate. So the market level interest rate will fall significantly, and average
1 minute remaining.
And aggregate mortgage lending will increase. And the second spillover impact is on pricing efficiency. So I found small banks compared with the big banks, their pricing is more efficient because they have a better soft information. And specifically, they are responsive to local default risk. So if we have a bigger small bank share in the mortgage market, that will make the overall mortgage pricing more efficient. So that concludes my my presentation here. So with Federal Home Bank, it can pass cheaper funding to the borrower, and also it makes market more competitive and improve the cost reduction pass-through to the mortgage borrowers. If we want to put a number there, so overall with the Federal Home Bank, that can pass about $50 billion interest reduction to the borrowers and help the
Thank you.
borrower. Thanks.
Our next speaker is Marcia Erickson from Grow, South Dakota, who will be followed by Mark Farley, Iowa Finance Authority.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to provide comments today. My name is Marcia Erickson, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of Grow, South Dakota. Grow South Dakota is a nonprofit community development financial institution providing innovative advancement of housing, community, and economic development across the state of South Dakota. Grow South Dakota has successfully partnered with the Federal Home Loan Bank in Des Moines, Iowa for over 25 years using the Affordable Housing Program.
I think it went well.
P Fund allows Grow South Dakota to assist low-income households in making necessary improvements to their homes to make them safer, healthier, and
Yeah.
more efficient. This funding has helped Grow South Dakota to provide home improvement measures totaling over $8.8 million and assisting nearly 1,300 low-income homeowners. The demand for housing improvements is high based on our current pipeline of homes waiting for assistance. Plus, home improvements were rated the highest in a 2022 Community Needs Assessment conducted by Grow South Dakota. In the survey, 74% of respondents rated home improvement as a high or moderate need. Also, nearly 1/3 of the homes in our 51 county service area of eastern South Dakota are more than 70 years old, adding to the need for home improvement. Here is one example of the importance of the AHP and how the funds positively impact the lives of people. Grow South Dakota received a call from a senior resident that needed assistance with heating. At the time of home inspection, we discovered energy inefficiencies and safety concerns in her home. The heating unit wasn't properly ventilated, which could cause carbon monoxide poisoning. The windows were leaking and there was no insulation in the house. But most significantly, there was no indoor bathroom. Grow South Dakota insulated the house, provided new storm windows, and replaced the unvented space heater. Besides a life-saving installment of the new heating unit, the most significant improvement with the assistance of the AHP program was the addition of a bathroom. After the work was completed, the client stated, "For the first time, I don't have to walk to the outhouse and worry about falling, and I'm able to take a shower without going to someone else's house. What I've received from this program has been life-changing." The reality is that is her home, and she did what she could to maintain it on a fixed income, and everyone deserves the basic amenities in their home. And there are stories like this across the country that captures the heart of what we do. The opportunity to age in place is critical and may not be an option for many without the assistance of the AHP fund. In the case of owner-occupied housing, the household income may not exceed 80% of the area median income. Grow South Dakota recommends increasing the AMI for owner-occupied housing to 100%. At 80% of the AMI, this locks people out that need home improvement, especially those hoping to age in place. In light of the rising costs, an increase in the AMI is more important than ever. Homeowners at this level cannot afford necessary and sometimes life-saving home improvements. With regards to rental projects, multifamily applications are awarded maximum points if 60% or more of the units are for households with income at or below 50% AMI. The remaining units are for households with incomes below 80% AMI. For smaller rental units in our rural communities, this income scoring makes it difficult to utilize the AHP funding for needed improvements. The scoring basically leaves out our smaller rural rental units out of the equation for AHP funding. It's simply not feasible. A fourplex, for example, is 3 out of the 4 units reserved for households at 50% or below of the AMI. If a rental unit has vacancies, we cannot rent to 3 of the 4 units to anyone over that 50% AMI. Yet there's families and individuals that are possibly unhoused or having difficulty finding housing in the community of their choice. This can cause vacancy issues in small units while people are in dire need of housing. Grow South Dakota recommends the scoring to 20% of the units at 100% AMI for maximum points, with the remaining units reserved for households with incomes below or at 120% of the AMI. Additionally, for rental units, the restrictions remain in place for a 15-year retention period. 15 years is too long of a retention period for units needing improvements. Grow South Dakota recommends a 5-year compliance period for rental projects with 20% forgiven each year. 15 years is a regulatory burden for everyone, and it makes it nearly impossible for small units to utilize the funding. This can lead to vacancies, and it can push the apartments into cash flow issues, leading to lack of funding for future repairs. Another recommendation to consider is a pilot program with established community development financial institutions. The pilot program with CDFIs could provide essential capital to meet the housing needs in underserved areas and provide affordable mortgage options. There is the potential to work with successful models that already exist within CDFIs and reach areas and populations that are currently not being served. Additional representation on the Federal Home Loan Bank's boards from nonprofit CDFIs will also increase the voice of those that represent the underserved. I would also encourage the reassessment of the lower than market value placed on collateral for CDFIs. The percentage of markdown is too high. Further, the current regional structure of the Federal Home Loan Banks works. The regional structure helps to develop lasting relationships that get to the root of the most challenging housing needs that are unique throughout our communities. Different communities have different needs. The regional structure allows better response to local needs and should be preserved. Finally, according to regulation, each Federal Home Loan Bank must establish an AHP and contribute 10% of its net earnings to the fund. However, this really is not enough to address the housing needs in our communities. More funding should be allocated and set aside for the program. And as said earlier, the program should allow for greater flexibility and be simplified. Grow South Dakota does recommend increasing the 10% that is currently required as an annual AHP contribution. Any contribution above that 10% should allow for flexibility to meet the unique
1 minute remaining.
in communities such as pilot programs with CDFIs. Flexibility to battle the challenges that are unique to each community is very important. I'd like to thank the FHFA for the opportunity to comment today and for the work that you do every day to make our communities a better place. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mark Fairley from the Iowa Finance Authority, who will be followed by David Brown, the Gathering Tree Eden Village.
Okay, thank you. I tried to start my video, but I think my video is controlled. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Hello, my name is Mark Fairley. I'm a finance officer for the Iowa Finance Authority. We are a state housing finance authority that was created in 1975, located in Des Moines. We issue tax-exempt municipal debt, which funds housing for low to moderate income homes, home ownership and rental. We're allocated a private activity bond cap annually by the U.S. Treasury. So I will start off just detailing some of our historical and present business relationships with the Home Loan Bank of Des Moines. There's kind of 4 key areas, and then just end with some future thoughts and a recommendation. So we are a housing associate, housing affiliate with the Federal Home Loan Bank of Des Moines. We did execute an advance pledge of security agreement with the bank back in 2006, which allowed the bank to extend credit to IFA through secured advances. The first business relationship involves liquidity facilities. Back in 2008, Iowa Finance Authority selected Home Loan Bank through an RFP process as liquidity provider for our newly issued single family variable rate debt. These instruments are VRDNs. They're short-term liabilities, which are remarketed weekly. Gives the investors a put option to the liquidity facility, which is FHLB. So in that year, in 2008, we issued $97 million of new VRDNs, both tax-exempt and taxable, backed by FHLB, which allowed us to finance 30-year fixed-rate mortgages to first-time home buyers across the state. So back in 2008, Home Loan Bank was not our only liquidity provider. We had 2 European banks that backed $140 million of variable rate debt. And during that economic crisis, the financial condition of those banks deteriorated to the point where the yields on those VRDNs increased and caused them not to be remarketed to investors. The VRDNs did go into bank bond status with extremely high rates and accelerated bond principal repayments. So during that time of crisis, fortunately, we had Home Loan Bank as a current partner. They were in our backyard here in Des Moines. We did turn to them to see if they could step in and substitute as a liquidity provider on the 140 million. Thankfully, they agreed with pricing out 5 to 7 years. We did have to prepare new offering documents, but we did get those bonds reissued in early 2009. And due to their AAA credit, the GSA name, the bonds no longer were a threat to go into bank bond status. And that pattern of successful remarketing continued over the next several years. We did go through a period where we didn't issue any single family debt until about 2015. We did reboot our bond program that year for new issuance, and we've done an additional 99 million of variable rate debt backed by Home Loan Bank with Home Loan Bank as a liquidity provider. So we've actually issued 336 million of single family liquidity facilities partnered with Federal Home Loan Bank of Des Moines. The second relationship involves a private activity bond cap preservation. We had a drawdown bond facility with Merrill Lynch in 2008, which expired due to the issues with Merrill during that time. We entered into a short-term note with Home Loan Bank to preserve our private activity bond cap through a process called replacement refunding. So they did substitute in for Merrill on this vehicle in the form of a short-term advance and note, and the proceeds of the note were invested into a pledged CD with Home Loan Bank that was held at the bank. They were the custodian. So the size of this note was approximately $50 million. The note was reissued and rolled over a few times for the next 1 or 2 years, I believe, and I think ended in 2011. This third historical relationship involves a private placement bond, which was issued by Iowa Finance Authority. It was backed by our general obligation. And that private placement funded 2 multifamily projects, permanent loan funding. It was a $12 million taxable GO bonds. The bond was variable rate based upon 1 month LIBOR plus a spread. And it financed over 300 units of affordable rental housing, 1 project in Davenport, 1 in West Des Moines. The fourth relationship, and this is fairly recent on the multifamily project side. We used the advance program in 2018 to help partially finance a $1.6 million project in Davenport. We had the flexibility to customize the terms of the advance and pass that structure on to the borrower. The project, we did a 7-year fixed rate advance with longer amortization, 15 to 25 year range, I believe. And then we pledged the promissory note as collateral. That advance has since been prepaid prior to maturity. I thought we might do more through this secured advance program on multifamily loans, but we didn't have the projects necessarily. So in summary, Home Loan Bank has been a trusted and excellent partner for the Iowa Finance Authority. We have a positive relationship with them, and it continues to be pretty solid. Future thoughts and ideas. Since Iowa Finance Authority is a frequent issuer in housing bonds, we're in the market selling, doing a public sale 3 or 4 times per year. It'd be nice to see if Federal Home Loan Bank could become a more active purchaser of our HFA long-term debt in the 20-year, 25-year, 30-year maturity range bonds with longer duration. That would help drive down IFA's overall cost of funds, composite cost of funds, and theoretically allow us to lower our mortgage rates to first-time home buyers in Iowa. And that concludes my remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is David Brown from the Gathering Tree Eden Village, and who will be followed by Jason Meyerhofer from First Federal Savings Bank.
Am I on? There you go. Thank you. I appreciate this. I'm going to bring you a view of someone that has received an AHP grant and just tell you our story. Eden Village is a program of the Gathering Tree, which is our 501c3 nonprofit corporation. We're in Springfield, Missouri. We are providing permanent supportive housing for the chronically homeless. We started the Gathering Tree in 2010. It was an evening drop-in center. It was our first encounter to deal with our friends that are homeless. And over the course of several years, we began to build relationships and began to understand what it really means and what's the true causes of homelessness. I can tell you our view of homelessness 13 years ago is totally different today. And probably our view 13 years ago was what most people's view is, but it's 180 degrees of what it was at that time. Our encounters with our people in the drop-in center gave us a chance to gain insight into the multiple causes of homelessness. About the fourth year of operating our drop-in center, one evening we decided, what we're doing is important work, but it is not solving the problem of homelessness. And that's when we began to look into what could be the solution to homelessness. We found a few cities, some in the Northeast, Northwest, I'm saying, that had built some permanent supportive housing in tiny home villages. We explored those, looked at that, and came up with a plan, began to dream, what could we do with that in Springfield, Missouri? In 2016, we put together a couple of teams that researched all this and began to raise money. And the end result was in 2018, we opened Eden Village 1. It's a permanent supportive housing tiny home. It's a gated community. And we have 31 homes in there. We're housing 31 individuals in those homes. In 2021, we opened Eden Village 2 here in Springfield with another 24 houses. And we are currently under construction of Eden Village 3, which will house another 24 people. And that should open about this time next year. We've already reduced the chronically homeless population in Springfield, Missouri by 25% through the Eden Villages. Our goal is that Springfield, Missouri will become a city where no one sleeps outside. And not only have we made an impact in reducing the homeless count here, but it's an economic impact for the city. It's estimated that in towns that have chronically homeless people, the average chronically homeless person per year costs the city about $30,000 to $40,000 per person. Eden Villages and similar villages like this can reduce that by somewhere around 60 to 80%. That's a huge economic impact. And it's particularly, those people particularly drain the healthcare system. And we believe that housing is healthcare. And not only have we, and so I tell this story just to praise the Federal Home Loan Bank, particularly the one in Des Moines, which is in our district. Each village has been the recipient of the maximum grant for that year. We have now been the recipients of $2.5 million. We have been typically able to raise enough money prior to getting the grant that when we get the grant, that is our tipping point and allows us to proceed with construction. We see the reason for this review is to gauge FHLB and its work. We wholeheartedly support the FHLB. We have no recommendations of what to change. Our staff, their staff has been outstanding in not only helping us with the grant, but also helping us make a good grant. And then after the grant, helping us when we have to do our reporting. What started as an idea, my wife and myself in 2010, to solve a societal problem has gone way beyond our dreams. Never had we realized what it would do, not only in Springfield, but across the country. We now have licensed 13 cities in 11 states to build our Eden Village model in their cities. We feel we've just touched the iceberg of homelessness, but we are now gaining national attention, and maybe our dream will spread where no one will sleep outside in the USA. My sincere thanks to FHA for allowing me to share our story, and particularly the FHLB for their help. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jason Meyerhofer from First Federal Savings Bank, who'll be followed by Jessica Garcia from Americans for Financial Reform.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure my video is going to come up either. Oh, there it is.
Jason, you should be able to start your video.
Okay, let me try again. Yeah, sorry, it's grayed out. I can just go ahead and proceed without video if that's all right. I keep hitting the start my video button.
Please proceed. Thank you.
Yeah, will do. Okay, thank you. Yeah, as mentioned, I'm Jason Meyerhofer, President and CEO of First Federal Savings Bank in Twin Falls, Idaho. And First Federal is a 107-year-old mutual savings institution and has been a member of the FHLB system for almost its entire 90-year history. And as the public input phase of the FHLB system at 100 winds down, I appreciate the opportunity to share some of my experiences and thoughts regarding the FHLB system. First, I'd like to reemphasize the importance of the FHLB system to the banking system and community banks in particular, and encourage you to be cautious, I guess, and thoughtful regarding potential changes to the system. From my experience as a community bank CEO, our FHLB membership is a vital part of our liquidity planning. FHLB funding has played a critical role for our bank in major financial cycles of the late 2000s, and most recently with the rapid increase in rates and deposit outflows. Even between those times, when there were stretches when we did not have any FHLB advances, just knowing we had access to a reliable source of liquidity allowed us to continue to lend to homeowners and businesses in our communities. If that source of liquidity became less reliable or accessible, our business model and lending activity would certainly be affected. I'd also like to offer a few thoughts regarding some of these specific issues which appear to be under consideration by the FHFA. With regards to FHLB membership of large financial institutions, yes, they have more access than smaller institutions to liquidity in the capital markets. But large banks are an important part of the FHLB system. They account for a material portion of the FHLB's earnings, which obviously is the basis for the Affordable Housing Program funding. If one of the priorities of this review is affordable housing, restricting larger banks' access to the FHLB system would be detrimental to that objective. Smaller institutions like my own also benefit from the scale larger banks bring to the FHLB system and the associated access to capital markets. If the FHLB believes FHLB advances need to be more closely connected to home lending, I would again encourage you to exercise caution in how this might be achieved. Once again, our bank provides a good example for my concern. We have about 50% of our balance sheet in mortgage-related assets. At this point in time, about 10% of our funding comes from the FHLB advances. As you can imagine, we don't try to associate our FHLB advances to specific mortgage assets, but clearly FHLB funding plays an important role in our ability to make and hold mortgage loans, especially non-conforming mortgage loans. These are good loans, but are not offered by most institutions because they are not readily marketable to the GSEs or other investors. I would also encourage caution regarding expanding FHLB membership to other housing-related entities, such as REITs or mortgage banks. Opening membership to less regulated entities would certainly increase the risk in the system. As you know, one of the key strengths of the FHLB system is its history of never sustaining a credit loss. And opening membership to these entities would increase risk in the system and potentially compromise its nearly risk-free standing in the capital markets. Finally, I think it's safe to assume that most of us agree that affordable housing is an issue in our country, but we need to truly examine the root causes for this. It certainly isn't a failure on the part of the FHLB system. And any changes to the FHLB system that negatively affect member institutions' access to this reliable source of liquidity will almost certainly have negative consequences for the previously mentioned issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker today is Jessica Garcia from Americans for Financial Reform. And then our Deputy Director, Joshua Stallings, will provide some conclusion statements. Thanks. Closing remarks.
Good afternoon, all. I want to start by saying thank you to FHFA staff for leading this Federal Home Loan Bank system review process. And thank you to all the folks who have joined today or participated in any of this process. My name is Jessica Garcia. I'm a climate finance policy analyst with the nonprofit Americans for Financial Reform Education Fund. Our mission is fighting to eliminate inequity and systemic racism in the financial system in service of a just and sustainable economy. In addition to many other areas, our organization cares about and engages on federal issues pertaining to housing, consumer protections, climate, and community investment. In order to provide a sufficient value to the public, the federal home loan banks need to expand their investment in affordable housing through the Affordable Housing Program, community lending programs, and other FHLB discretionary activities. The FHFA should also create climate risk guidance for FHL banks to support member banks on climate mitigation, climate resiliency, and disaster preparedness and recovery efforts. I appreciate the opportunity to participate today, and I will note that we have already submitted written comments and plan on submitting additional comments, particularly on affordable housing. Today, I'm going to focus my comments on climate risk and resilience. The FHFA, in step with other federal agencies and programs, must confront risks from climate change, which threaten the lives, livelihoods, and homes of families across the United States and represent substantial and growing financial risk. Physical threats from climate change include fast rising sea levels that threaten our coastal towns, higher incidence of severe storms and hurricanes that batter the Gulf region, unprecedented levels of riverine flooding that damage homes along major waterways, and devastating wildfires that consume homes as fuel in our western states, now effectively year-round. Climate impacts will continue to grow and are likely to become exponentially more costly for decades to come. These climate-driven weather events represent profound risk to our nation's housing stock and mortgage markets because beyond immediate physical damage, areas that experience these events often see increased rates of mortgage default, community-wide depreciation in property values, and insurance pullouts. Failing to act on climate will contribute substantially to inequities for low-income communities and communities of color. As climate-related harms gradually impair household and community financial conditions and reduce services to those communities, banks, in turn, are becoming more reluctant to serve those communities. Banks are concerned, for example, that these impacts will compromise the abilities of these communities to repay loans. This has resulted in banks increasingly avoiding climate vulnerable areas. Acute and increasingly frequent climate-related disasters such as wildfires and hurricanes, as well as chronic issues such as heat stress, sea level rise, and drought, disproportionately impact low and moderate income communities and communities of color. Communities that, in this situation, are left to bear the costs associated with both the physical impacts of climate change and the risk management measures that banks may take. Given these disproportionate impacts related to housing and community investment, the FHFA should be considering climate-related risks and opportunities in its review of the FHLB system, particularly for the most climate vulnerable communities. I'm going to share 3 recommendations to begin addressing climate risk. The first is that the FHFA should publish guidance on climate-related risk to the housing finance system as a logical next step following its January 2021 public request for input on climate and natural disaster risk management at the regulated entities. FHFA guidance should ask FHL banks to monitor and ensure their members, even those not classified as large banks, adhere to the climate supervisory principles from the federal banking regulators once finalized in 2023, as well as similar guidance from state insurance regulators. It is critical that FHFA climate risk guidance ask federal home loan banks to encourage members to enhance operational resilience to climate risks, especially for smaller institutions that provide vital banking services to underserved communities during and following disasters, and other times of acute need, and that risk mitigation strategies by member banks remedy rather than exacerbate economic burdens on lower income communities and communities of color and promote affordable housing goals. FHFA supported climate risk mitigation measures generally should be developed in a way that ensures accessibility and affordability in LMI communities and communities of color, and which promote bona fide wealth building opportunities in these communities. Acceptable climate risk mitigation for FHLBank members can include lending strategies that promote climate resilience, including the development of climate resilient affordable housing, schools and businesses, clean electricity projects and microgrids, nature-based protective infrastructure known as green infrastructure, building decarbonization, which includes holistic home weatherization and health interventions, electric public transit and electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and lending to green small businesses and corporations with legitimate decarbonization transition strategies. For smaller community-based banks, investment in weatherization and climate resilience for local businesses can improve the financial health of the community and promote safety and soundness. The second recommendation is that the FHFA should require that each of the federal home loan banks hire a climate risk officer to monitor climate risks relevant to their region and membership and lead on climate risk management practices. These risk officers should engage with FHFA on future climate-related guidance for FHLB system members. These officers should be hired in recognition of the need to educate FHLB bank members on climate-related physical and transition risks, as well as climate resilience and greenhouse gas and pollution reduction project opportunities for member banks. The third and final recommendation is for supporting climate-related financial risk opportunities. In addition to climate-related financial risk guidance, the FHFA could provide guidance, and federal home loan banks can help support knowledge transfer across members on green lending for underserved communities to provide confidence to smaller banks in moving forward on these kinds of loans. In conclusion, with the FHFA's review of the federal home loan bank system, affordable housing and climate risk and
1 minute remaining.
should be top priorities for reforming the 100-year-old federal home loan bank system. Any resultant actions after the conclusion of the review process should align with the upcoming 2023 finalization of the proposed Community Reinvestment Act. On climate risk, the FHFA should engage with the prudential regulators, federal home loan bank system members, the Biden administration, and other federal agencies on the Justice 40 initiative, as well as other climate-focused federal programs, such as the Inflation Reduction Act programs. Our organization plans to submit more detailed written comments alongside partners by the deadline next Friday, March 31st. Thank you for your time today and throughout this process.
Thank you. And thanks to all the speakers that joined us today and throughout this 3-day listening session. Before we conclude, Deputy Director Joshua Stallings will provide closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And thanks to all of you that have joined us and provided comments over the past 3 days. We appreciate you taking the time to offer your input. When we kicked off the Federal Home Loan Bank System 100 review last fall, we could not have anticipated the high and sustained level of engagement from stakeholders across the country. In listening sessions, regional roundtable discussions, and written comments, we have heard from hundreds of people about the important role the Federal Home Loan Banks play and could further play in providing liquidity to members and supporting affordable housing and community development in the communities they serve. We've had 2 multi-day listening sessions and held 19 roundtable discussions in communities across the country. I will never forget what we witnessed as we made the stops along the way. For those that opened their doors and spent time with us along our journey, I want to say that we see you. We appreciate all the hard work that is being done to address the needs of communities across the country. To that end, it is important to note our work is not yet done. In fact, in many respects, we are just getting started. In the following weeks, my team will be reviewing everything we have heard and be putting together a report with recommendations that FHFA believes it can implement. Further, we will have recommendations for consideration by Congress to ensure the banks are well positioned to continue to meet the needs of the members and the communities that they serve. I hope you all stay engaged and stay tuned for updates later this year. Before I wrap, I would like to encourage you to submit written comments to on the Federal Home Loan Banks. We will continue to accept those comments next week through March 31st. Details on submitting the written comments can be found on our website. Please also check the website for recordings and transcripts from past listening sessions and roundtable discussions. We appreciate the feedback we have received and thank you again for your interest and for joining us the last several days. Thank you very much.